Okay. Are we ready to go? I think so. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Michael Markowsky. Welcome to my studio. Today we're going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today we're going to be looking at the art of Thomson. And we have done, I think, 6 or 7 paintings by Thomson already. This, I think, is going to be one of the hopefully the most straightforward and simple of all of the paintings that we've done so far. So I'm really excited to do this one. It's, I think, a beautiful painting, and it's super appropriate for the weather here in Vancouver, where I'm filming live right now, because it's pouring rain. It's a miserable day, gloomy, sort of when you imagine Vancouver weather, that's what we've got today. So this seems like an appropriate painting for a rainy day. So let's look at the plan for today's episode. What we're going to do is we're going to start by getting the image onto the canvas. Then we're going to stain the canvas with a little bit of color. We're going to talk about Tom's biography. Then we're going to talk about the how we're actually going to not talk. We're going to actually do maybe, I don't know if we'll do the underpainting. We'll see. And then we're going to kind of work our way from background, foreground until we're done. And because this one is relatively straightforward, we should be wrapped up in about 2.5 hours from this exact moment now. So if you're watching after it was recorded, you can just jump to the timestamps in the playlist below and go to your favorite part, or go right to the end, see how it turned out. And then hopefully, hey, you're back. Nice to see you. Well, let's get to this painting. So, if you want to support the channel, a great way to do so is just by hitting the notification bell, the like button, so that you can join us in future episodes, and helps the algorithm so more and more people like yourself find these classes. As well as if you want to make a small donation, there's the PayPal link down below. There's the super chat function, which is right where you leave a comment here in the live YouTube session. And if you want to contact me through my website or the Facebook group, speaking of which, I just want to make a quick mention of that. Here's our Facebook group. I encourage you to join the group so that you can post your image that you paint today to the Facebook group. Once a month, I go through the Facebook group, cull all the images together. Cull? Is that? No, cull's the wrong word. Gather all the images together and give people free feedback to help them improve their artworks, as well as art that they're making outside of class. So join the group. It grows every single day by leaps and bounds, something that came out organically through the conversations in the live chat, just like we're doing today. So let's get started here. Let's get our image onto the canvas so that we have something to paint. Now, you could, of course, just draw this image, but it would make it probably a little bit easier, especially if you're a beginner artist, to use the process that I'm about to show you right now. So there's a free template that is located in a Dropbox folder that I'm going to show you here in a second. And there's a link to it in the description below. You can go to that Dropbox folder. You're going to see there's a lot of folders within that folder. The very top are our intro paintings. And then the next, all these ones that start with a letter, these are our most basic introductory episodes. So you could pick any one of these and you should be able to follow along relatively easily. And then the ones that are maybe a little bit more complex start with numbers, and we go all the way down here. You'll see that there's lots of I mean, everything from the Mona Lisa to the great paintings by Frida Kahlo and Agnes Lawrence Pelton. I mean, all sorts of stuff. Cartoons, comic book characters, famous paintings throughout art history, etc. So we want to go back to this Thomson painting, Z. And you'll see that there's 4 files in here. Those 4 files, there's 2 versions of the outline. One's a JPEG, one's a PDF, whatever's easier for you to print out on your home printer at home. Nothing special. The original image itself, and then this little cheat sheet here that I've created that hopefully will align with most of the things we've done. I've used this to teach students in person, and we haven't had any problems yet, so it seems to work pretty well. So to get this image onto the canvas, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to tape this down. So I just use, you can use any kind of tape. I like painter's tape because it can stick pretty well and comes off very easily as well without leaving residue on a wall, or in this case a canvas. And I should also just mention before I go too far, right, so this is my outline, which I printed from the web. This is a canvas that I'm using. This is a 9x12 sized canvas. I like this brand. I just saw, you know, they or someone on the Facebook group mentioned that the price went up radically. It seems to kind of go up and down. You know, there's a link to buy this exact brand off of Amazon in the description below. And now I'm going to take some carbon transfer paper. You can use graphite transfer paper. They do exactly the same thing. There's no one is better than the other. And you'll see that one side's kind of shiny, and there's a lot of lines on it because I've used this many times before. And I'm going to put the shiny side down. So one side's shiny, one side's kind of matte, right? And again, you can use this same sheet over and over and over again. And then I'm going to take a pen, and I'm going to go over these lines. And I'm not going to go over all of them because many of these lines are about to get hidden with paint. But it's just going to help kind of guide me a little bit so that I have a little bit of an idea of where some of the paint is going to go and roughly where the horizon line is going to be. So don't feel like you have to make your painting exactly like Tom Thomson's, because it probably won't look like exactly like Tom's no matter how hard you try. And that's really not the purpose of these classes. Really, I want to get you excited about making art. I want you to develop some confidence with mixing colors, and we're using great art from great artists from the past to inspire us so that we can also learn a little bit about some of the great artists that have come before us who made great contributions to human culture, not just art, but I think to the betterment of humanity. I think if more people were making art, we would live in a much better world. And so I think each one of you making art is in your own way making the world a better place. So you can see there's a lot of lines that I did not do, and so if I look at this, I think that's fine. Yeah, there's obviously tons of little details in here that I've just removed. So I'll remove that. I'm going to put this back in here. And then I like to save these outlines for potentially a future painting, or you can give it to a child or an older child who maybe a retired child who might want to color them in. Right? Okay, so let's go to our next step here. Well, White Wasabi says, have you done the Mona Lisa yet? We did do the Mona Lisa. I think that's what the Mona Lisa. I think that's what you're meaning, right? Yes, we have done the Mona Lisa painting. God, about a year ago? More than that, maybe a year and a half ago. It's there in the description below for sure. So, there's a link to the playlist, and you can go in the playlist and find that image. Okay, so our next step is we're going to apply a little bit of color to the canvas. We're going to stain the canvas, or as the Italians have called it for the past 600 years, the Imprimatura. You've got to say it out loud to get the full satisfaction of the Imprimatura, right? Okay, so what that means is there's, well, many different people have different ideas of what this might mean. The way that I see this is we're going to put a solid color of this warm yellow here. And if you're like, warm yellow, what are you talking about, warm yellow? Well, this is the exact color that I'm about to use, that I literally just squeezed onto my palette. Here is this Azo Yellow Deep by Amsterdam Paint. I'm not sponsored or paid by them. I bought all my paint just like you guys do at a local art supply store, but I've done 246 paintings using this brand because I think it's probably your best bet for price to quality, especially if you're a beginner artist. You can certainly get more expensive paint like Golden, and you can pay about 3 times the price for about 3 times less paint. It is much higher quality, has a higher pigment load, as we would call it, so more pure pigment to medium ratio. But I won't overwhelm you with any details here. Another brand you could use is Liquitex, and these are the colors I would recommend to replicate what we're doing. Winsor & Newton, Artist's Loft by Michael's Art Supply chain, Buzz, Peebo, Holbein, Daler Rowney, Fevicryl, Novacolor, Chromacolor, and as I mentioned a few times before, this one has not worked. This Museum Color by brand based in Toronto, which has a little bit of white mixed into every color, so it makes it impossible to mix your own black. So if you're finding any of the colors I've suggested result in the impossibility of mixing a black because you've got some little bit of white in all of your colors, let me know so I can also ban it forever. So anyway, let's go to making our painting here. So what I've squeezed a little bit of color onto the canvas, and I'm going to put a little bit of water on here. Now, most people do not use a warm yellow to start. So I know people are like, that's crazy. Why is he doing that? Well, I've talked about this ad nauseum in many episodes, but it's sort of just a personal preference. Really traditionally artists would mix, a kind of a rusty red color, kind of a rusty brownish red, earthy red, earthy brown, and that works. Obviously it works because artists have been using it forever. And this I sort of just started doing by accident and realized it gets so close to reproducing those results that for most people won't be able to tell the difference at all. And it's so much faster and easier to get started, right? We don't have to worry about mixing a color when we're just getting started. We can just squeeze that warm yellow right out of the tube, apply it to the canvas, and boom, we're off and running. Because one of the purposes of doing this, as I see it anyway, not really the way that the Italians would have seen it, but is that it just sort of obliterates that scary blank white canvas, and it just is like, boom, okay, the painting has started. We haven't had to think about it too much. We haven't had to worry about, have we got the right color? Is it the right brown? Oh, I don't know. Maybe I did it wrong. I'm off to a bad start, and I'm only just started, right? So here, warm yellow, boom, painting's begun. Can't go wrong. It's going to look 97% identical to a painting that used the traditional brown. And I've done just that many times. In fact, we did that with the Berta Morisot painting just a few weeks ago, where I did 2 of the identical paintings side by side, and the difference is pretty negligible. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry, and let's move on to our next step here. So I want to talk a little bit about Thomson's biography as an artist. Now, We have talked about Tom many times. There's been, as I said, this is our 7th maybe episode focusing on this artist. We did a whole week related on his art last July in recognition of the 104th anniversary of his unexpected and mysterious death. So I think today I might focus a little bit more on that, the circumstances surrounding his passing, because I don't think I really covered that in the previous episodes. So let's jump. Again, if you're just joining us, join the Facebook group. Do it right now so that you can easily take a photograph and upload your artwork to the Facebook group after we're done. Or after you're done, and maybe me too, right? So here's Tom's biography here. Tom was born 1877 and dies in 1917 at the ripe young age of 39 years old. And certainly it was a surprise, an unexpected death, which we'll get into here shortly. So Tom is like a farm boy. He was born in Leith, Ontario, which is, in fact, I've got the Google Maps queued up here for us to refer to. So we're zooming in here. Here's Toronto, Ontario, the largest city in Canada, and then you've got Ottawa, the capital, Montreal, at one point was the largest city in Canada. So Tom does spend some time in Ontario, or Toronto, as we'll see here shortly. But Tom is born, let's see if I can zoom in here. So here's Owen Sound. This is the largest town near where Tom was born. And this right here is the tiny village of Leith, Ontario, which really is, I've been there and I don't even remember, I don't think there's anything there really, except houses. I don't remember there being a convenience store or even a gas station. So it's just a tiny little community, and Tom's family farm which still exists. It's an equestrian center now. So there's you can go ride horses, or I'm not sure if you can go there and ride horses, but they do have horses on the property. So Tom is born in this area, raised on the family farm. He has, now I'm trying to remember how many brothers and sisters he had. And I should know this because I'm working on a graphic novel all about his life. Whoa, so this area here is what we now call, or is referred to as cottage country, Georgian Bay right here. And it's sort of soon, when he's 18 years old, he goes to Seattle, Washington, to stay with his older brother, who's running an sort of a, not an art school, but it's like a trade school for people to learn how to do printing, and both like literal printing, handwriting, and also like lithography, for the kind of the boom in the printing presses that are happening. Because Seattle in 1902, when Tom gets there, is really a major boom town, because in 1902 is, well, in the late 1800s, you have the gold rushes in Alaska and Yukon in northern Canada. And so there's a lot of people taking the train to Seattle, getting off and getting on boats that are taking them north into the gold fields up north. So Thomas sort of goes from a tiny, tiny little community to a massive boom town, which must have been a major culture shock, going to Seattle, which, you know, was, besides San Francisco, the largest city on the West Coast at the time. He is there for a few years, and some of the details about what he does there are a little bit spotty. Although he does have he falls in love with a young woman out there who they have a falling out. She breaks his heart, and he returns back to the family farm in Leith, Ontario. A few years after that, goes to Toronto. And it's in Toronto where, Toronto where he meets a number of other artists who are working for a graphic design advertising firm called Grip Limited. And at Grip Limited, he is working primarily doing the photo transfers and etchings onto plates. So he's working in kind of a dark room, exposing these metallic plates to light and then sort of doing etching on top of them. And he's applying some of the skills that he learned from his brother, who had an art school in Seattle, as I just mentioned. And at Grip Limited, you have all of these other artists, many of whom later go on to form the group, or it's basically a movement, but a group that they called the Group of Seven. And actually, the Group of Seven doesn't form until a few years after Tom Thomson dies. There's always, a good trivia question would be, was Tom Thomson a member of the Group of Seven? I would say 99 people out of 100 would say, yeah, of course he is, duh. No, he was not. He died a few years before it was formed, although he exhibited with the Group of Seven, because they, in fact, the very first Group of Seven exhibition that was held, they had an empty chair for Tom's spirit to sit in, so he could also he could attend the exhibition in spirit, right? So Tom is living and working in Toronto, and during this time you have the artists who are working at Grip. They often go up to Lake Simcoe, which is, you know, at the time would have been maybe an hour's train ride north of Toronto, and they would go up there and they would paint. And they started inviting Tom to go along on these painting expeditions. And most of those artists were quite, many of them had attended art school. Tom, it's not quite clear exactly how much of an art education he had, but he did take at least one art class with a well-known art teacher in Toronto, William Cruikshank. And so he had some knowledge of painting. How much, we're not sure. But eventually he starts going on these trips to Lake Simcoe with his co-workers. And it's not too soon after that that they decide to go even further afield to Algonquin Park. And Algonquin Park had only very recently, I think maybe about 10 years before this, like 1905, I believe, had been declared a provincial park. It's now one of the largest provincial or just any kind of park in North America. It's a huge, sprawling park full of lakes, and it's a very popular sort of summer destination for not only people in Toronto and elsewhere in Ontario, but when I was there a few years ago, well, 5 years ago, I went canoeing with my best friend, who was my best man at our wedding. We went there and we spent nearly 2 weeks camping and canoeing all over the park. But let's just look at we'll kind of jump from there to kind of really the end of the story, because again, I've talked a little bit about the time he spent in Algonquin Park. So this lake right here, Canoe Lake, is where Tom spent a lot of his time when he was in Algonquin Park, because there was where I think it was right here was where there had been a lumber mill that had been very active prior to, well, even after Algonquin Park had been declared a provincial park, there was still clear-cutting logging going on in the park. So ironically, now today we think of Algonquin Park as this pristine, untouched wilderness, but when Tom first started going there in about 1912, it was like the moon. There were tree stumps everywhere, and there were logs floating around in the water. And really, I think it was 2 years before this, the logging company had kind of abandoned the cabins and all of the places where people were staying and working on the logging camp, and had moved elsewhere. And I think it's right about here was the train station. There was also a large hotel right here called the Algonquin Hotel. And Tom also began, and this is highly contested, but some people will believe that he had a relationship with a woman named Winifred Trainer, whose father had a cabin that was right here on the water. And there is speculation that not only did they have a relationship, but that there was possibly plans for them to get married in the summer of 1917, and that might have been something that he wanted or was being forced upon him by family of Winnie Trainer, because some also believe that she was pregnant with Tom's child. And this is all documented in a number of books by the celebrated Canadian author Roy McGregor, there's another author who through his own research separate to Roy McGregor says that that's ridiculous and that didn't happen at all. But it is interesting that after Tom dies, Winnie goes to Philadelphia with her aunt for 8 months and then comes back. And that was something that happened back in the day to unwed mothers, that if they happened to become pregnant, they might go away for a little while. And then that child, obviously they have a child in some other hospital way far away, and that child is given up for adoption. And then they come back as if they just had a nice little refreshing retreat, which obviously would have been incredibly traumatic. Winnie Trainer never had any other relationships that anybody knows of after the relationship she may or may not have had with Tom Thomson during the time he was there, again, roughly 1912 to when he dies in 1917. Yeah, she never remarried. She spoke wistfully about that time, and so that's kind of another part of the tragedy of the death of Tom Thomson. So I just want to zoom in here a little bit more. In fact, let's go to the... So this gives you a little bit more of an idea. So this little pathway roughly follows close to the actual original train line. I think now I'm trying to remember. The train, did it go... There's a bridge... I can't remember, looking at this map here. But anyway, so Winifred's Trainer's cabin was right around here, I think. And this is where the logging company and where the lodge that Tom had sometimes stayed in was right about here. None of it exists anymore. It's since long been demolished. And this is all... like, it looks like pristine wilderness. If you are in the area, though, you can roughly right about here, and it's not marked, it's very hard to find, is the Canoe, or Algonquin, well, what is it? The Canoe Lake Cemetery, where Tom Thomson was originally buried and subsequently a couple days later unearthed and supposedly taken on a train in the middle of the night back to the family plot in Leith, Ontario. Earlier I showed, in fact, this is if if I go back to here, actually, no, never mind, was the Leith, Ontario is where the family plot is, and there's a large headstone for Tom Thomson. But some people believe Tom never left Algonquin Park, and that his body is still, in fact, interred in the Leith Cemetery. And I've been there, I've visited it. There is a little cross that was put there by a CBC television camera crew in the 1980s that does not actually mark the resting place of where Tom was originally buried, but is because no one is exactly sure today exactly where the original burial place of Tom Thomson was. But maybe I'll just also skip back a little bit. So Tom left on, was it July 7th, 1917 in his canoe with very little supplies and just paddled out into Canoe Lake and disappeared. And a week later, his body was found floating right about here. And it was in a horrible state of decomposition. It was a very horrible sight. And he was quickly buried that day, or well, they left him there that day covered with a blanket because he was decomposing in the water, and it was a pretty terrible sight and traumatic for everyone involved. So they buried him even before a medical examiner could examine the corpse. So, but the family, when they heard that Tom had been buried in Algonquin Park, were very upset and had his body disinterred and removed and moved back to Leith. But there was some discussion of maybe his body wasn't moved because the fellow that helped load the coffin back onto the train said that the coffin felt unusually light, and the fellow that dug up the body wanted to do it all by himself literally in the middle of the night by a lantern, which is just sort of, you can't make this stuff up. This guy claimed that he was digging up this hole, digging up a body in the middle of the night, loaded it into a coffin and sealed it. It was kind of a metallic coffin, and so the one of the park rangers, Robinson, what was his first name? Something Robinson, helped load, and he was like, it seems a little bit strange, but he didn't think too much of it. And you have to remember, back at this time, Tom Thomson was not a famous artist at all. He was well known and beloved by his friends and his large family, and had sold a painting to the National Gallery of Canada, to a number of collectors, another painting to the Art Gallery of Ontario, and had made, a small sum. Like, he was successful within his small circle of friends, but he was really just at the very beginning of his creative journey. He had made these major breakthroughs, and we can kind of just take a look at some of his art here. In fact, let's kind of... So Tom, if we just sort of look at some of Tom's earlier work, it's a little bit... They're kind of a little bit dull and brown, and using kind of a little bit more of an academic approach to painting. And after having spent some time with A.Y. Jackson and J.E.H. MacDonald, Arthur Lismer, and who are some of the other artists that we're going to be talking about starting next week, that had just escaped my mind. He really sort of blossomed very quickly as an artist. He really figured out painting in sort of a remarkably quick span of time, and before long he was, basically surpassing all of his friends who had much more extensive training, who had traveled widely around the world and had seen many of the great paintings in museums in Europe and New York. Tom, as I said, had really only been to Seattle and his home, and Toronto. And Toronto was not a tiny town at that time, but Toronto was you know, not the way when we think of Toronto today and we think of it as literally one of the largest cities in North America. Montreal was essentially the commercial metropolitan center of Canada. So Tom had really not seen much, we might call it great art in person. He had really only experienced it through any books or magazines, and those things back in the day would have all been in black and white. So he's really just learning from his friends who have seen those artworks. And, you know, it's within like a year or two, Tom's palette becomes much more colorful. He becomes much more expressive with his, with the way that he paints. And the other thing too is he's painting on location in Algonquin Park, sometimes literally sitting in his canoe making paintings, or sitting on the shore making paintings. And when I went to Algonquin Park to work on a project, an exhibition I was commissioned by the Thomson Art Gallery to do an exhibition in honor of his 100th passing, the 100th anniversary of his death. I spent, as I said, 2 weeks in Algonquin Park, canoeing and camping and fishing, and I'll tell you, it's really hard to get anything done when you're worried about what you're going to eat for lunch and dinner every day and you're out fishing. You know, Tom was an expert outdoorsman. He was raised not too far away from where he ultimately ended up dying. So he was very familiar with, you know, an expert canoeist, an expert fisherman, and an expert at cooking fish that he had caught, which is one of the things that people often talked about, like how quickly he was able to debone a fish was quite remarkable. So, and so Tom would spend literally from about February to March until October, even into November, from 1912 through to when he died in July 1917. He would spend that entire time in Algonquin Park, maybe sometimes taking a train back to Toronto for a short visit, and then back he went to Algonquin Park. So because he had been given the opportunity by an early supporter of his to literally quit his job and devote himself full-time to painting, and he did. He was just like, okay, I'm doing it, let's do this and see how much I can do. And so during the brief times he was back in Toronto during the summer, he would take some of his sketches and he would enlarge them onto larger canvases. And there's only a handful of those larger paintings that he ultimately completed, the Jack Pine being probably the most famous, as well as the West Wind. So here's one of the sketches for the West Wind. Here's a sketch for the Jack Pine. The Northern River, this is also an important influence. I mean, pretty much everything you're seeing on here. He made probably a couple, 250 paintings in total, and there's 40 of them here on display that are also are very important. But anyway, I just want to end this discussion of Tom Thomson and the death of Tom Thomson, because again, Tom left on a clear day, went canoeing, disappeared. What happened to Tom Thomson? Some believe that Tom may have committed suicide, that some believe that he was depressed, and that he, because he had impregnated Winifred Traynor, that his life was coming to an end, and he was distraught, and therefore took his own life. Seems a little bit unlikely, a little bit dramatic for somebody to do that, but possible. Some believe that he was murdered. In fact, the person who claimed to have been the last person that saw him paddle out into Canoe Lake happened to be a person that that potentially the night before got into a fist fight with Tom Thomson. So some people say, well, that's a little bit interesting that the guy that may have had a fist fight with Tom Thomson the night before is the last person to see him the next day paddle away. That's, and again, a lot of this is conjecture because, Tom Thomson was not famous. He dies, and it's sort of a little bit kind of, it's a bummer, but whatever, we're all going to move on. And it's not until literally about another 10 years after he dies that a biographer, Blowen Davis, writes a book about Tom. It starts to kind of really start the myth of Tom Thomson, and then people start kind of looking back, and memories, they're being interviewed, and they're remembering moments of Tom and what Tom was like. And as we all know, memory is not the most reliable document of history, and some people were interviewed multiple times over the years, and their stories changed wildly. There are recollections of Tom being the sweetest guy, a teetotaler, someone that doesn't drink, a church-going man, and a upright citizen. And then there's completely the opposite descriptions of Tom as being like a hard drinking, rough guy that was, prone to angry outbursts. I mean, things that are pretty hard to reconcile, although sometimes we can be different people to different people, right? So, all of this, ultimately, the story of Tom Thomson is sort of a perfect story for anyone that likes mysteries, because there is no end to this mystery, and there's always a new book or speculation, of which mine will just add to this mound of confusion ultimately. But kind of maybe I'll also show, there's this cairn that was built by Tom's friends, and this plate was created by J.E.H. MacDonald, who we'll talk about in a future episode in next month. But him and his J.H. MacDonald built that cairn right here on the tip of this peninsula within Canoe Lake, which is still there. You can go visit. I went there, visited with a friend, and we did a rubbing of the cairn in our sketchbooks. But where the story sort of, and I'm just going to kind of go into the kind of cover this briefly because I want to get to the painting, but the sort of the maybe more salacious part of this entire story occurs. It's not here, is it? So it's 1950, October 1956, this guy, Judge Little, although he wasn't really a judge, and his friends go, and they've heard all these stories for decades about how the coffin that was loaded onto the train was a little bit light, and maybe Tom was still there. So they get this bright idea, after having a little bit of whiskey, to go dig up some holes in the cemetery and see if they can find good old Tom. And lo and behold, in an unmarked grave that was purported to be where Tom had been originally buried, they found a skeleton in the grave. And whose skeleton is in the grave where Tom Thomson was originally buried? That seems very unusual, isn't it? So this is one of my drawings right there, and looks like a lot of my art comes up here under when we Google this stuff. So this is a photograph of the skull that was found inside the grave, which happened to have a hole precisely where some people who had been on the scene when Tom's body was found said that there had been a wound on his temple. That's also adds to the intrigue here. Why on earth? I mean, that seems like a pretty interesting coincidence. The medical examiner at the time said that it was actually not a Caucasian fellow, but in fact it was an indigenous man. And so they promptly closed the case, purportedly reburied the skeleton and all the bones back in the grave, and said that's it. Nope, Tom's body is back in the family plot where his family thought it has been for the past you know, 30 years at that point. But of course, that didn't put an end to it, because people are said, what? So you're telling me that there is a Native American who died, and no one has heard of anyone having died, and then buried in Tom's empty grave, which is not unusual for a body to be buried in an empty grave where someone had previously been buried. It's not entirely unheard of, because it certainly makes your life easier to dig a hole where one has already been dug. It's easier, but it is. You can see why the speculation as to what happened is, you know, it's ripe for intrigue here, and for people to inject their own imaginations into this whole scenario. So I think, well, I just sort of close this just by saying that a few years ago, I did a project, as I said, at the Thomson Art Gallery. This is the catalog of the exhibition that was created. Do I have a copy of that book somewhere? Oh yeah, here's a little one. So this is a little copy of the book that we created, and all the drawings that I made, because one of the things I did for this exhibition is I did almost 40 large illustrations showing different scenarios of how Tom Thomson may have, or how he died. He died, but how did he die? That's the question. So there's the book, but I also collaborated with a forensic artist, Louise Selecki-Weir, and one of the things that we did together is we did a facial reconstruction of the skull based on the photographs of that were of the skull. That who knows whatever happened to the skull. We did a facial reconstruction, and this is after, and she didn't. I purposely did not tell her anything about this at all. This is the image that she created based on that skull, and this is a photograph of Tom Thomson. I mean, I don't know. I will say that in talking to Louise, she, when I showed her that picture side by side, she's actually not convinced that it's Tom Thomson. She's like, yeah, I can see the resemblance, but there's a little bit of a difference with the forehead. The nose is something that we don't necessarily know. It's pretty hard for a forensic artist to make, to determine exactly what someone's nose would look like, because it's just cartilage, and it's obviously, but it is a remarkable remarkably similar, right? Again, the forensic artist herself is not as she's like, it's possible, but I'm not. It's not close enough for her to make a definitive comparison. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of an idea. I have a lot of background and interest in this story, which is why I've just been rambling on for the past 40 minutes all about it. So let's close the case for now and move on. So, do we need to do an underpainting? I don't think so. I don't think in this case we'll do an underpainting. Typically, an underpainting might be, and again, this is different people will talk about underpainting being different, but the way that often we think of an underpainting is maybe a little bit of outlining of some details, maybe a little bit of shapes and flat colors potentially, just so that you might be able to see where the important details are. Now, a painting like this is pretty straightforward, so I think that's just busy work. So what I'm going to do is move on to our next step here, which is to paint the background. I'm going to start with the background, then we're going to go to the foreground, finish the background, finish the foreground, and having done that, we'll have finished the painting itself. So let's get a little bit of paint onto our palette. And I've forgot to put my little labels on here. So we got our warm yellow. I can't remember if we're going to use all of the colors for today's painting or not. So I'm going to put all the paints down here. Of course, you can always decide to just jump to the very end of the video and go like, oh yeah, he didn't use whatever color. I guess I won't either. Looks like my red is out. Maybe my blue is out. So I have backups here I'll get to in a moment. Oh, I just realized I'm not wearing my painting pants today, which is because my daughter, I literally 2 minutes before this class started, got through the door. Our daughter got her flu vaccine, so I have pants that shouldn't get paint on them today, which means I will probably get paint on them today, because that's how the universe works, right? So this is exactly the paints that I had showed listed before, but these are just extra leftover paints that I will put into these jars if I've got a tube that is just about empty. Rather than throwing that empty tube out, maybe it's been a while, but I will squeeze out the rest and use a small little spatula to scoop out the rest. With my palette knife here. Okay. So also, just for anyone who's new to the channel, you can see I've got 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues. This type of a palette, the colors that I've squeezed out on my palette, are what's called a split primary palette. So that means we've split our primary colors into 2, because every color is either warm or yellow. There are some colors that are right on that line that are, you know, just barely there, but they still are a little bit warmer yellow. So we can make the color that's in between here just by mixing those 2 together, right? So let's take a look at the painting itself and see if we can make a decision as to what colors we want to start with. So when I say background, what I'm going to start with is the things that are furthest from me, which is the sky that is furthest away past beyond the horizon here. So I want to start with these purples there. I'm actually going to use a little bit of a different purple in the sky on top here, because that's actually closer to us, right? Because that's kind of almost like right up ahead. This is much further behind. And we can accentuate that with another color, but we always want to use our cool colors in the background and warm colors in the foreground, because what that does is it creates depth in our painting, because warm colors advance, cool colors recede. So we're going to mix our, in fact, we can also just look at our cheat sheet here if you want some information. So right here, I'm talking about basically mixing a really cool and muted purple. So maybe I'll just show this here. So what we're going to do is we're going to mix our cool red and cool blue, right? And those 2 colors we're going to get a purple that's going to be right about here. And that purple is if we, it's closer to what we call the neutral core. If we want a much more saturated purple, we would mix our warm blue and cool red because they're closer to one another on the color wheel. They're pretty much adjacent, right? Whereas these ones, we got to make a little bit more of a leap. And the effect is very subtle, that's true, but it's an effect that our brain comprehends maybe more than we're necessarily aware of, right? So let's take some of our warm red and our cool blue, and let's mix these two together. That's a pretty nice color. I like that a lot, but it's also, you know, pretty intense, pretty saturated to this extent already. So what I'm going to also do is add a little bit of white. When we add white to a color, we tint the color. That's what it's called, tinting the paint. And that obviously kind of lightens the color, but it also makes it appear to go backwards as well, right? Because just as warm colors advance and cool colors recede, saturated colors advance and desaturated colors recede. Just think about if you're standing looking at a mountain really far away, and let's say you hold up just a flower in front of the mountain. You'll see that the flower has more color, it's more saturated, versus the mountain in the background is going to have like a grayish kind of quality, right? As well, not only is the flower going to appear to be more colorful, more saturated, but the blacks and the whites are going to be more intense, right? So the contrast of values is going to be more intense in the foreground. Okay, so let's take this paint here and man, that chat, there's a lot of, whoa, look at all those comments. I don't know if I'll be able to get through all of those comments. So if somebody has something really important to say that I missed, please put it in the comment again, because I don't know how I'll be able to get through all of those right now. Which is a good thing to have, right? It makes me pleased, and I read all the comments, just sometimes not during class, because otherwise it'll take me forever. Okay. So I'm going to begin here with this little bit cooler purple, and I'm going to put this, kind of follow these shapes. All right, so I'm just putting the lines in as I see them. And if you see some lines there that I don't see, then you can paint them. You don't have to wait for me or ask me permission to do them. You can do them yourself. Maybe I'll just make that go right to the edge as well there. Let's go right to the edge. I think that's pretty good. Next, let's just take a little bit more white and mix this in here. And then let's kind of go across. It's okay if these aren't, you know, exactly, if there's quite the contrast like I've just done, that's okay. We're going to kind of go back into all of this later on. So what I'm doing here is I'm just getting this paint, as much of it on the canvas, and trying to capture this kind of this big cloud that's moving through the sky. And then once I've got a little bit of that, I can then just go in, and assuming the paint is still kind of wet, because I was applying it kind of thick, I can kind of blend these out a little bit. Just kind of blend, move them into one another. Just by going over top of some of those lines. Alright, let's take a little bit more. Let's get a bit, maybe a little bit lighter even. So don't worry about, my goal here is not to get the painting perfect and to paint exactly what I see on my left there, but just to get this kind of filled in. Just kind of start this painting, right? So it's a little bit lighter on the right side, so that's why I just added a little bit more white in there. Okay. Now now I got a little bit of extra paint on my brush. I'm just gonna brush it out. Now I could go in here and try to really make sure that I cover up all that yellow. But you know, I kind of like being able to see right through there and see the little gaps in the paint. And in his case, this would have been a wood, like a birch wood panel that he's painting on, right? So part of my goal here is going to be to try to leave a little bit of that yellow poking through, which I'm telling you is not an easy task. It's really hard to not completely smother the canvas with paint. Part of what Tom's doing, he painted this on location in Algonquin Park, and you imagine he's painting it very quickly because these clouds are moving. You know, he might have started the painting when it was pouring rain, and by the time he finished, the sun is out. And when that could have been maybe 20-30 minutes, he worked on this painting. So it's very fast. He's not laboring over details. He's just trying to get it done as quickly as possible before whatever the scene before him is gone. Okay, I think that's okay. That's for that beginning step of the painting for our sky. I think I'm okay with leaving this right here. So let's move to our next step. So now that we've got the sky is, established, it's started, it's not finished because we're going to go back there shortly, but we've sort of just got something there that we can work with, basic colors roughly in the right place and roughly the colors we want, but not kind of tweaked exactly, but that's a good start for us. And so what we want to do is now we're going to move to the foreground. So we're going to paint the water that's in the front, and we're also going to paint, these trees and hillside as well. So one thing we can just take a look at our little cheat sheet that I created here. So this is what we're talking about, the middle ground, right? So to do the hills in the background is basically mixing a black, but we're going to add maybe just a little bit more blue and yellow to it to turn into a little bit more of a greenish black. So maybe I should also just mention here. So if we want to make a black, right? Black is when we use 3 of these primary colors that are the furthest away possible. And so what we can do is we can mix a green by using cool blue and cool yellow, and that's going to give us a green. And the color opposite that green is our warm red, right? So if we take those two colors and mix them together, they're going to cancel each other out, and we're going to get black. So in this case, we're going to basically do that, but we're just going to leave, we want a little bit of a slight greenish hue to this color. So let's take some of our cool yellow. You notice I didn't even wash my brush. I just wiped it off because I don't mind if it gets a little bit dirty. I'm sure Tom, sitting in his canoe, is painting as quickly as possible. He might only have a couple of brushes he's using, and sometimes that color sort of, whenever he's got a color, it's sort of making its way throughout the entire painting, which I really love. I really encourage that type of approach. Okay, so this has gone a little bit more on the brown side. So that tells us maybe I put a little bit too much red in here. So I'm going to up the ante with a little bit more blue. And that's pretty good. That's a pretty close color. Is it a little bit too green? I'm going to add a bit more yellow in here. I'm going to take just a little bit more warm red. If I get the ratio perfect, I'm going to have black. But as I said, I want something that's still, it's just a really dark green to start. And this is kind of a cooler green as well. I think that's pretty good. I'm also just going to go to a smaller brush. Yeah, I think I need a little bit of a smaller brush. So let's put these side by side. So let's take this color and paint this in here. And see, there's this little gap. That's, I'm going to paint some sky back there in my next pass. So I'm not going to worry too much about getting that perfect. Now I'm going to paint a little bit more of a black over top of this later on. So this is going to be a color that might poke through a little bit, just like the background is poking through a little bit in this painting. You know what, I'm going to take a little bit of this and just put this in the foreground, which is a little bit unusual because, you know, we usually want like a warmer color here, but looks like he's done something similar to that there. So I'm just going to put it there, and we can always paint over it in the future. He's looks like he's done a little bit, a few of these little streaks. I'm just extending this area of the painting right there. I can easily paint over it, but it's so much easier that if there's something there now that it just makes my life a little bit easier going forward. Okay. So if we look at the next step here, is getting a little bit more of a warm reddish black. You know what, I'm going to come and do that in my second pass in the foreground. So I'll do that a little bit later. I'll come back to that area. So what I want to do now is I'm going to work on the water for my foreground. So again, let's bring this back here. Just going to wipe that excess paint off. And so for my water, maybe I'm just going to quickly wash my brush here. My warm red and cool blue, cool yellow. So it's basically the same color that we had there that I just used. Or sorry, this is for the water. Sorry. what did I say? Warm blue, warm yellow, white. Yeah, it makes sense. Okay. So I'm going to take my warm yellow. Let's take some more of this here. My warm yellow and my warm blue, and mix these guys right here. And I'm going to add white to it. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to worry about mixing a perfectly uniform color. I want to try to paint with paint that is still a little bit, you know, there's multiple, like if I just zoom in on this, you see my paintbrush, how it's kind of got some green and white and yellow. It's a little bit uneven. Most of the time that's not desirable. Most artists would try to get rid of that. Most artists would keep on mixing. But again, Tom's painting fast. He's probably hardly even looking at his paint. He might mix for a little bit. He's looking up like, oh, okay, that green, how do I get that? Okay, I'm gonna mix that. Okay, I don't have time to get it perfect, right? So let's back out a bit here. And let's start putting this water in. Okay. So I'm also just going to take a little bit more blue and get that on my brush here. So each time I'm going in there, the color kind of changes a little bit. Let's get maybe just a little bit more blue in there. White in a few places, just sort of going over things. And I'm going to paint some stuff down there later. Maybe I'll take a little bit more, with a bit more yellow in here. Okay. That's pretty good. Let me see. So I'm gonna paint this area right here. In fact, I'm gonna wash my brush because I got white in here. I guess I could have done this before. So what I'm gonna take a little bit more red this time and mix it into this color to make it just a bit more of a brownish, dark brown, blackish color. I'm going to take that and I'm going to paint it into this area here. So I'm going to lay down this. So you can see the difference between those two colors. In fact, let's... Okay, Lolly's got a question from Nikki. what's the question? Nikki says, if could you tell me if I started selling these copies of old famous artists online, would I have problems? Because I've had some reports of even recreating pictures of ordinary people up to date in some Facebook groups. You can be sued. Does this work? I would... Well, the goal of these classes is not to create paintings that you go off and then sell. Really, these are classes that... here we go. That's the ghost of Tom Thomson there saying, "No, don't sell my paintings." You know, it's kind of a little bit of a gray area, but I would discourage selling these paintings, and instead encourage you to create your own artwork that you go off and sell. That, you know, there's nothing stopping you from doing it, but especially artists who might be from disadvantaged groups or minorities, the idea of making reproductions of their work and selling it is kind of distasteful. And we talked about that with a few African American artists who literally found, you know, during their lifetimes, people were making copies of their art and selling it. Or even like Maud Lewis, people were making fakes of her work while she was alive and making lots of money off of her work. So I would discourage the making and selling of these reproductions. Now, I remember I worked for an art gallery once. It was a framing store, really, and they would get paintings by a group of 7 members made in Vietnam. There's factories in China and Vietnam where literally there's thousands of people cranking out reproductions of the Mona Lisa and these paintings, etc. And they would ship them and all rolled up, and one of my jobs was to take them and stretch them onto frames, and then we would sell them. And, you know, especially things that are in the public domain, there's no, as this painting kind of is. Again, that's really tricky because technically the images, the photographs are under copyright, because one way museums can maintain copyright over like the Mona Lisa is they just get a new photographer every 30, 40 years to take a new photograph, copyright the photograph, and technically it's illegal to reproduce the photograph. The painting itself, of course, you can duplicate, but that's why they don't want you taking photographs in museums, because technically if a painting is under is in the public domain, you could take a photograph of it and then put it online and sell it, which is what they don't want you to do, because they want you to go and buy a copy in the bookstore or gift shop, right? It's an interesting kind of question for sure. But my recommendation would be to instead of making reproductions of these paintings and selling them, is to instead create your own original artwork and sell that instead. So maybe I probably could have done a little bit of this. I guess I could wait for this to dry. I'm just going to put a few of these little dots and things down here. I think that's probably good enough for that stage of the painting. And I'll say that there's a number of Tom Thomson paintings that are literally just like this on display. There's a really, if you ever get a chance to go to Toronto, you should go to the Art Gallery of Ontario. It's a beautiful building that was sort of redesigned by the famous Canadian architect Frank Gehry. About 10 years ago, sometime around then. And they have arguably them and the National Gallery of Canada and the McMichael collection in Queensburg, which is in about 45-minute drive north of Toronto, are really the three places that have the most Tom Thomson artwork of all. And then there's just a few paintings scattered across the rest of the country, which I always think is a kind of a bummer. It's sort of the opposite of Emily Carr. There's a lot of great Emily Carr paintings in the Vancouver Art Gallery collection and just a few out east. So if you come to Vancouver, you're sort of inundated with Emily Carr work, which is great because she's really the greatest artist, I think, in Canadian history, the most famous and one of the most important. But then you go out east and there's just a few of her paintings out east. And then you come out west, and there's really very little Tom Thomson or Group of Seven paintings here because it's all out east. And it's, for a country like Canada, which is, sort of a centralized socialist government, you would expect those paintings to be equally distributed across the country. I'm not saying that they should be, but it's just the irony, I think, of our... That's a whole other discussion. Okay, so let's move on to our next step here. So, I'm really satisfied with where the painting is at this moment here. We've really just been painting for, 30 minutes or less? And we've got paint across the entire surface of the canvas, including the background already. What we want to go do now is just finish the background so that we can then finish the foreground and be done with the painting, right? So, what colors do you think we should put here? Really, what we're probably going to do is just maybe go back and we'll probably start using smaller brushes. I'm going to go into the background with some smaller brushes, and then I'm going to maybe build up to some larger brushes. Let me just bring these side by side here. So I'm going to start with some smaller brushes back here, and then as I get closer to the top, I'm going to start actually using warmer colors so that it appears that this is closer to us. And then we'll go back down here, we'll do the foreground in the next step. I might also take a little bit of this color and apply it kind of sparingly down here, because of course the sky is going to reflect light into the water, right? Because right now this has got a very greenish quality. I want to bring a little bit of that purple down into here. So let's start with this color that we had used previously. Let's just take more of that white. And we had used our cool blue, and was it our cool red, right? So two cool colors. They're super cool, dude. We're gonna mix those in here. Let's start with a little bit more white. In fact, I'm gonna go really white to this area. And honestly, I kind of want to try to do this as quickly as possible, as opposed to kind of like laboring over things. I kind of want to just be like moving quickly, because it also creates a different kind of brushstroke. When you're painting kind of quickly, you get this little bit more of a jittery kind of quality that I think is really reflected in the painting. So I need more white here. And also, if I paint with a little bit of a thicker paint, that paint is going to stay wet just a little bit longer, and that's going to allow me to then mix other colors into that wet paint. And create a little bit of blending. Now, if you're painting with oil paints, it's not a problem. You don't have to worry about that because it's going to be wet for weeks. But if we're painting with with acrylics, unless we want to use like a slow dry medium, we want to have paint that is kind of a little bit thicker so that we can get some kind of nice effects with it. Okay, in fact, I'm going to mix more of this here. Let's get a little bit more. Again, I'm not going to worry about getting it perfectly mixed. I'm going to like having a bit more of this paint that is a little bit thicker so that I can mix into it. Okay, now let's just sort of add a little bit more white into here. I'm also just going to go in and add maybe a little bit more blue into this mixture, some a little bit cooler blue. It's a bit much, but I went a little too far there, so I'm just going to mix it back into my paint. Okay. I'm just going to take maybe a little bit of that cool blue and just kind of have a little bit of fun with it, bring it out a little bit more. Now, people who've been painting with me for a while know I really like saturated colors, so maybe that might be a bit much. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a little bit of my warm blue and start bringing this into this color, because this is, I'm just going to start moving from the background towards the foreground. So I want to have a little bit of some slightly warmer blues in here, which is going to make it look like it's a little bit closer to us. And honestly, I'm not really looking at the screen much at the moment. I'm just trying to get paint on here and do it as quickly as I can, because that's the way Tom's painting is, just the sort of frantic application of paint. Let's add some more white into this. Okay, so maybe what I want to do, just kind of now, is just think about, like, if I can replicate a little bit of the movement of these clouds. Let's get some more white in here. And up here we've got kind of these lumps. I'm just going to take some white right off the palette. Take a little bit more red, warm blue. So this is, now we've got a bit of a different purple here. We've got a little bit more of a warmer, more saturated purple. It's a little bit harder to see because, you know, we've mixed some white into it, so it looks very similar, but it is slightly different. And again, it might be just a little, like, too similar for the majority of people to necessarily tell the difference. But the brain is like sort of unconsciously picking up those differences and pushing that more forward than the previous purples we were just using. Let me see, how much, I guess I could continue that. Now, yes, am I covering up things that were there? I guess technically, but I'm also not trying to completely obliterate it. I want some of that to kind of be there, just as there's sky behind sky, right? The sky is, there's a lot of atmosphere in this painting. Let's get a little bit more. These little flicks of the brush. And as I pick up paint on one side, I can kind of take it and smudge it into another side. I don't know, I'm starting to get thinking I'm getting close to finishing the sky as I want it. Is it exactly the same? Not really. But it's never really been a major priority for me, so. Okay, I think I'm starting to just push paint around, and that's probably about as good as I'll get. Right? Okay. Oh, actually, so before I move on from here, I'm just going to take a little bit of this paint, and I'm just going to add a little bit of it. Oops, it might be a little bit too white. Let's get a little bit more purpley. I'm also going to let's take a little bit more of this blue and the purple, my warm blue. Little spots down here. Well, he says, "Sky's looking great, Michael. I appreciate this." Okay. Just getting paint. I'm so used to just wiping paint all over myself when I paint that I have to be careful that where my hands are today when I'm not wearing my painting pants. Okay, so let's move on to the next stage. I think, you know, rather than focusing more on the sky's not perfect, but I don't think it needs to be perfect anyway, right? And I kind of want to lead a little bit by example, showing you that it doesn't have to be perfect, because I know some people will focus on it endlessly when it's, you know, it's okay. Just let it be. Be what it is. So let's move to our foreground. Let's finish the foreground, and really we'll finish the painting in the process here. So we've got the background, 2 passes on the background, 1 pass on the foreground already. So it's kind of well established. So really what we're going to do is maybe darken these hills and these trees here, foreground, and just finish up the water. So this time, let's actually make a black. So I'm going to take some warm red. Maybe I don't need all of that. I'm going to take some of my blue. There's a bit of white in there, which is not desirable, but that's okay. There's not too much of it there. Let's mix that together. Now, that's, you know, basically very similar to this, except here we used the cool blue, right? And we got much more of a purple. We mix these 2 guys together and get this really dark purple, you know, very eggplanty color. Let's take some yellow and cool yellow, mix that into there. And if it goes a little bit brownish like this tells me I've got too much red in here, or too much red and yellow. We need to add some more blue to balance it out. Okay, so let's mix this together. So it can be really hard to tell what color it is when it's just a big mess like this. You're like, I don't know, do I got it right? I have no idea. It's just a blob. So one of the tricks you can use is just by taking your paintbrush and mix it into some white. And then you can see the color a little bit more clearly. It'll lighten it up. So what this tells me is it's a gray, it's a little bit more on the bluish side. It's a little bit of a cool blue-gray. Now, that doesn't bother me at all, because what I want to use this for is for the mountains in the background. If, however, and in fact, I'm going to want to make this a little bit warmer and a little bit, so I'm going to add more warm red for this area here in these trees. But this initial mixture, because it's got a little bit more cool blue in it, is perfect for the purpose that I want to use it for at this stage. In fact, I'm going to wipe my brush off because I got that white on there. And white is a pretty powerful color that can sort of infect the rest of the color. So I want to keep this as dark as possible. Any white is going to start turning that into a gray. So let's take this kind of dark, 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 cool black, cool bluish black, and I'm going to paint this in here. Now again, in fact, if we just zoom in, you can see how Tom's adding a little bit of texture in here. So he's painting, okay, let's zoom in. So he's painting like this here. Just make sure it's a nice focus. Painting it, and then he's sort of adding, and maybe I'll even add more paint here to kind of try to replicate a little bit of these vertical brush strokes. I'm also going to allow for a little bit of that brown that I painted there before to show through, and I might even want to add a little bit of more of it afterwards. We'll see how things turn out. There's some white on the top of these hills that it's so pretty thick and wet, so I just want to be careful I don't get too much of that mixed into my paint. I'll take a little bit of this purple. I'm just going to put a bit of that slightly purpley color into the top of that hill, because I'm just, as I zoom in, I can kind of just see really, really dark purpley color there. And I like how that looks, so I'm just going to add a little bit more of it. Oops. Right here. Good. And I think, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to add a little bit of more yellow into this dark color. Mix that up real good. Just apply this kind of ever so subtly to that foreground here. So just to kind of, another thing, let's see if I use the end of my paintbrush here. I'm not sure if this is what he did here. It's a little hard to tell if that's brushstroke or scratching onto the surface. but it kind of replicates that look, doesn't it? Okay. So next thing I want to do is I want to do these trees over here. So as I said, I'm going to take a little bit more of this red and bring it in here because it's a warmer color. And I still want this to be dark black, but I just want to give it just a little bit more of a brownish quality. So let's zoom in on that. So in fact, I'm going to show you a different angle too. Oh, that camera looks like it tilted down a bit. Okay. 1 second here. So like I'm holding the brush very loosely, right? And I'm just kind of like allowing it to kind of just, almost just kind of just delicately kind of touch the surface here to give it a very subtle kind of look of these trees in front of the background. Tree is, I guess, that tree belongs to this outcropping, I guess, right? I'm also going to now take a little bit, instead of my cool yellow, I'm going to mix this in with some of my warm yellow. So just take this color I just used, give a bit more of a warm green here. I'm going to take some of my cool blue. In fact, let's take even more cool blue. So what this is now is just like a really, really dark, cool, or warm green. Again, I'll just use the opposite side of my brush to kind of just scratch. That surface a bit. And let's see, another question from Nikki says, I'd like another opinion, please, for people who have been painting in acrylic for a while. Would it be interesting to try with oil paint? Good question. It sort of, it depends. There's a lot of depends, and maybe I should make a video on it one day, but there's a few things. One is oil paint takes like much longer to dry. Like a painting like this could take literally maybe a month and a half to dry, especially because I'm painting a little bit heavier. So do you have the space to make a painting that can be wet and literally, you know, and not only the painting itself, but your painting area? You know, acrylic paint, if I make a big mess in my studio, within 20-30 minutes, it's bone dry. And if I've got cats walking around in my studio, they're not going to stamp paint all over the couch because it gets on their feet. It's not, if I got kids running around, they can, you know, 20 minutes after today's episode, I can literally hand this painting to my daughter and she can touch it. With an oil painting, you got to be able to let it sit for a extended period of time, especially because if you use thick paint, it can be kind of dry on the outside, but like kind of, but wet inside, you poke it like a zit, paint's gonna squeeze out. So that's one thing. Another thing a lot of people talk about with oil paint is that it smells. It's got an odor to it, which I love. I love the smell of oil paint, but not everybody does. Some people find it, I think for a lot of people, they think it smells toxic, that they think it smells, very strong. The paint itself has that smell. I think what some people confuse is some people will use like turpentine to clean their oil paint brushes, because you can't just use soap to clean your oil paint brushes. So it can be a big pain in the butt if you're painting with oil paint, is just the cleanup. Now, yes, there is, over just the past few years, people have invented water-soluble oil paint, and I've never actually used it, so I sort of, my brain can't even wrap my head around, like, oil paint that is, you can clean up with soap and water. How does that even work? That's some wild, incredible chemistry. So there is that. And people will use turpentine, as I said, which can be really strong, toxic, because they're not good for your skin. So people instead, it's generally recommended, instead of using turpentine, is to use odorless mineral spirits, or OMS, to clean. And that is, it claims to be odorless. I think it still has a bit of like a turpentine-like smell. And so if you've got rags around, those can have smells, and they can also be flammable. So there is, you know, that's why oil paint has really fallen out of favor. Even like when I went to art school 25 years ago, unless you were like, for instance, when I went to art school, I was painting with acrylic paint, and everyone was like, you can't paint with acrylic paint and be taken seriously, Michael. Like, you gotta move to oil paint. You gotta make the jump, or just no one's gonna buy these things. You're not gonna be taken seriously as a real artist. So I was like, okay, I'll switch to oil paint. And I love oil paint. A lot of my paintings that I make for myself over the past 20 years have been in oil, but there's a lot of issues that come along with it. I love the fact that the paint stays wet for a long period of time, because it's nice to be able to leave to work on a painting and go have dinner, go for a vacation, go to Hawaii for the weekend, or ever come back, and your paintbrushes you just left on the table, you don't even have to clean them. You can just keep on painting. But that's, you know, but it also means that if you're doing layers of paint, like Leonardo painting the Mona Lisa, you've got to, and there's maybe 20-30 layers of paint in there. There's very thin glazes in oil. Each one of those layers takes minimum a few weeks to dry. So that's why it can take, those master paintings, Renaissance paintings, took sometimes years to paint because of all of the slow drying layers that, you know, each layer had to dry before you put a new layer on. Something else I was going to say about, I guess the other one thing, if you really get into the mixing, the chemistry aspect of painting, and to which there's a certain extent of that with acrylic, like, you know, I always advocating people to, instead of using water, to use matte medium, and if you want to slow the drying time down. You can use slow dry medium, and you can use glazing fluid. So there's these different mediums you can add to your paint. And if you like that ability to customize your paint, then you'll love oil paint, because oil paint is essentially like chemistry. You're mixing and you're figuring out your ratios, and you're literally using all of these sometimes toxic chemicals. Again, you don't have to use toxic chemicals, but a lot of kind of more traditional oil painting practice does. So one example that I've used in the past to talk about the difference between oil paint and acrylic is the difference between like an Apple computer and a PC or Microsoft, right? Apple is more like your acrylic paint. You know, you open it out of the box, you can use it. You don't really have to do too much customization for it to work. I teach almost entirely acrylic paint these days because it's just easy. It's accessible for a lot of people. It's easy for a beginner to just go out and buy some supplies, and they can just paint on their kitchen table. When the kids come home, pack everything up into a shoebox, and you're done with it. Oil paint is a lot more like your PC. It's infinitely customizable, and some people like their PC for that. They're like, how come I can't upgrade my iPad? This is ridiculous. I want to put more memory in it. I want it, you know, more storage, all these kinds of things. Well, too bad. That's the iPad you bought. That's what you get. That's like acrylic paint. Oil paint, yeah, it's like the PC. You can open it up, you can put things in it, you can tear it all apart back down to its bare bones and reconfigure it. You can use essentially the same box your 40-year-old computer came in and put new components into it. So it's it's a little bit like night and day. You know, people are always asking me, do an oil painting class, and I think, yeah, but the audience for oil painting is smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller every year. Now, professional artists, there's no stigma against using acrylic paint that there was when I was an art student. I'd say the vast majority of people paint in acrylic paint nowadays, even professional artists, whereas, as I said, 25 years ago, that was totally inverted. So, if that answers your question. So, let's... I want to get this bottom of the painting finished here. So I'm going to take the same color, this kind of greenish color that I had. Let's paint a little bit of that. Where am I? Down here on the bottom. And again, I'm kind of just want to dab paint around here. Now I could be using a smaller brush, and maybe I will transition to a smaller brush here shortly, but I always sort of like using bigger brushes whenever possible. Stop doing too much fiddling. Nothing against fiddle players or fiddle music, but when it comes to painting, I don't want to fiddle too much. Okay, let's just take a look side by side, see how we're doing here. It's been a little while since we did that, right? Okay, I got it. I'm gonna go down to a smaller brush after all. It's just too hard to get some of these little sticks and things. Okay. Paula says, since we're painting at home, one can use any medium. You can use oil. Just let your paintings stand high so your grandkids cannot reach it. Put it on a high shelf. That's true. You know, that is true, Paula. Having said that, there's some people that don't have grandkids, they've got kids. And sometimes those kids climb onto things, and you know, again, oil paint, because it takes a long time to dry. Let's say you drip a little bit onto the floor, and your kids step in that paint, and they track that around the house. They get that on the couch, and it just gets everywhere. It's like glitter, and you're cleaning that is a major pain in the butt. On the same side, though, because it takes longer to dry, it does give you more opportunity to clean it. Unlike acrylic paint, if you get acrylic paint on your hand and you put it on the couch, you're almost out of luck, right? Because it dries almost instantly, right? Okay. So, I really just want to finish the water now. So, in fact, I think I'm so close here that I think it's time to just do our finishing touches on this painting. So really, I'm just going to do a little bit of water, little reflections on there, and I think I'll be more than happy to call it a day. So let's bring this guy back up here. Ah, oops, wrong thing. Okay. So, there's not a lot more really for me to do, but I might want to take a little bit more of this purple, bring that a bit more down here, and even take a little bit of my warm blue. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my warm blue and my cool red. Do I have any cool red left? Got a bit there. Let's just mix this. So this is going to give me a much more saturated, intense purple. So I'm actually going to paint a little bit with this color. Let's now take a bit of white and mix this in here. Just take white and blue this time, my warm blue. Get a little bit of that. Yeah, a little bit more colorful, but that's okay. I'm also gonna take a bit of my warm red and warm yellow. Get a bit of an orange going here. And I just want to do this kind of sparingly, but there's places here. Now I think technically this is actually the board that he was painting on, kind of just showing through in places. So I could do a little bit more touches up in the sky, but I think I'm just going to keep it pretty low key. Right there, that's okay. And then I'm just gonna go back here. Let's get a bit, see if I can mix a black just one last time, a little bit closer to black. Pretty close. Let's just see how close I was. It's a little bit more on the purpley side, so I'm just gonna add just a little bit more yellow in there. If in doubt, I want it to be a bit more on the reddish side if I can help it. Okay, that's pretty sure. Well, it's still a little purpley. Not too much yellow. Okay, let's just say good enough for government work there. I could actually squeeze a little bit of black out down here, but and then lastly, let's just finish off the water. Do I need to finish off the water? I mean, I guess I can just do a little bit here. So I'm going to take my my warm blue, and my warm yellow, mix these guys together. Take a bit of white. Clean up that edge. again, I want to try to keep it's hard to leave these little bits of yellow poking through there, so I'm doing my best just to leave those things intact. A little bit more blue in there. One little area, just want to touch that up. Okay. So I think that's good enough for me to feel good about, to walk away from. So let's do our side-by-side comparison. We've reached that end of the episode here where we're going to take a look at the paintings side-by-side and see how they turned out. Maybe just before we do that, though, I just want to encourage you to like this video, hit the subscribe button, and hit even the notification bell so you know when upcoming episodes are going to happen, so that you can participate in our feedback episodes. Once a month I look at everything that's been uploaded to our Facebook group, so I'll just show you that one more time. Join the Facebook group, upload your picture here, and then in about another 3 weeks from today we'll do another one of those. That's really probably one of the most popular things that I've done here. So do that so that you can help get better. I think that's what everybody wants to do when they're picking up a new skill. Another thing that is super helpful that a number of you have done in the past is going back to previously aired episodes, leaving a comment on those episodes. Which episode was your favorite so far? Because that helps other people when they're trying to choose 250 different paintings that we've done. Which ones should you do? If you go and you see, oh, there's a bunch of comments, people say they really enjoyed this one. That's probably a good sign, right? So that would be, I would really appreciate that, and that's free to do. If you want to support the channel, though, with a small donation, you can use PayPal, the Super Chat function here within YouTube. You can contact me through the Facebook group or my website. All of those links are in the description below. So, let's take a look. Here's our final painting, but how does it match up to the original, you ask? Well, here they are. And what do you think? I'm pretty happy with the way that these turned out. You know, I might have gone a little bit heavy with my cool blue in here, which is that blue that you see kind of popping through there. He has it in his, but he was a little bit more subtle with his use of paint. But I think when I just see my painting on its own like that, I think I'll be really, really happy. And, you know, it's when you compare, you despair, right? So if I put them side by side, it's like, oh, it's not quite good enough. But unless you plan on exhibiting them side by side or have a little photograph of the original next to this one, most people will never know the difference, right? So let's just take a little zoom in and see, where should we start? Let's just start kind of on this hillside on the left. Well, let's leave a little bit of the edge of the painting. Okay, you know, so as we get up close, you can see he's even more purpley. That blue really stands out as a major difference. And obviously some of the brush strokes in there are very different, but you know, that's not a particular concern to me. I'm more interested in, you know, learning a little bit about painting, exploring a little bit about different techniques. So if you've got different colors, different brush strokes, don't worry about it. Let's just look up into the top of the painting now. You know, again, you can see that very different, you know, maybe you got a little bit of that S shape in here, but a lot of this stuff is different. No problem, though. Again, a little bit different. You know, one thing too, that you could see in his paintings, there's a much more texture in the paint, right? So one of the things I could have done is use something like a gel, in this case, like a heavy matte gel. Maybe not the extra heavy, but just like a heavy gel. And you can use matte or glossy. I always prefer matte. I could have put that in there, and that would preserve more of the texture of the paint as it comes off the paintbrush, and I'd have a little bit more of these kind of lines that appear. One thing, going back to the difference between acrylic and oil paint, is acrylic paint, as it dries, will what's called self-level. The peaks and the valleys will kind of blend together to much more of a unified surface. And that, again, that's one thing some people love about acrylic paint. That's one thing some people hate about acrylic paint. As I said, there's ways that we can introduce more texture in there if that's really important. Again, I don't think it's not a concern to me, but if you wanted that, you could add more to it. Let's look at you know, we're not bad. I'm happy with the way that this turned out. It's maybe a little bit more red and brownish in there, whereas he's got more green, but not a big deal, right? I could have maybe spent more time down here to really clarify these reflections, which I didn't do, but I'm not too worried about that. Let's just sort of look at the hillside. Where are we at? Right about here. You know, I did that bit of scratching into the canvas to give a little bit more sense of the trees on the other side of the valley or the water. And I think that's fine. I'm happy with that. I suspect he probably didn't do scratching as I did. In fact, he probably instead, that's just the texture of the paint coming off his paintbrush. So, but I've kind of simulated it with the back side, the end of my, the opposite end of my paintbrush, the wooden end. The colors, I'm pretty satisfied down here. Again, they're not all the same in the same places, but the color is roughly similar, right? And probably good enough for government work, as my grandfather used to say. And we'll just look at one more time before we say good night. Yeah, pretty good. So if yours turned out anything like that, then that's a major win, right? Okay, everybody, thanks so much for painting along with me. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see you next week when we look at the art of A.Y. Jackson. We're doing a really cool, beautiful Aurora Borealis painting, one of my favorite paintings of all time, by another one of my favorite artists. So until then, good luck on finishing this painting, and I hope you decide to create some more paintings inspired by your own interests and consider making those and selling those. You know, the holidays are coming up soon. Instead, perhaps you could gift one of your paintings to a friend or family rather than trying to, you know, sell these artworks, which I consider more as studies. After all, this is our master study series. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you again very soon. Take care.